Thomas, weary from his long journey, dragged his suitcase through the grand yet eerily deserted lobby of the Grand Blackwood Hotel. The once opulent space now seemed to echo with the ghosts of its past, each step he took reverberating through the vast emptiness. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay, a stark contrast to the vibrant city bustling outside. It was as if the hotel existed in a different time, a forgotten relic amidst the modern world.
Just the one room? His voice echoed slightly, adding to the surreal atmosphere.
The clerk mumbled, his gaze distant, lost in some unseen world beyond the counter. His eyes seemed to look through Thomas as if he were merely a shadow passing by. Thomas nodded, suppressing a shiver that ran down his spine. The clerk's demeanor was unsettling, adding to the growing sense of unease that had been building since he entered the hotel. There was an unsettling stillness to the hotel, an almost palpable silence that seemed to hum in his ears. It was as if the very walls were whispering secrets, secrets that Thomas was not meant to hear.
Room 404, last room on the left, top floor. The clerk's voice was monotone, devoid of any warmth or welcome.
The clerk droned, sliding a tarnished key across the counter. The key looked ancient, its metal worn and cold to the touch. His words echoed in the vast emptiness of the lobby. The sound seemed to linger, as if the hotel itself was absorbing every noise. Thomas accepted the key, its cold metal sending a jolt of apprehension through him. He couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if the key was a gateway to something unknown and possibly sinister. As he made his way up the creaking staircase, each step echoing in the oppressive silence, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a nightmare. The stairs seemed to go on forever, each creak a reminder of the age and neglect of the building. He paused outside room 404, the only room on the floor with its door ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning him within. The number 404 seemed ominous, as if it held some hidden meaning. Taking a deep breath, Thomas pushed the door open, stepping into the room. The air inside was even heavier, filled with the scent of old wood and something else, something he couldn't quite place. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere that made his skin crawl. He felt as if he had crossed a threshold into another world, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. The air in room 404 was heavy, stagnant, like the air in a tomb sealed shut for centuries. It felt as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disturb its long-held silence. The musty odor of decay clung to the threadbare velvet curtains and the faded floral wallpaper, assaulting his senses. The once vibrant colors of the wallpaper had long since faded, leaving behind a ghostly reminder of a time when the room might have been considered elegant. The single window overlooking the city's glittering skyline did little to alleviate the oppressive atmosphere. The contrast between the lively city outside and the suffocating stillness inside was stark, almost mocking.
Oh, this place. It was clear that the room's condition was far from what he had expected or hoped for.
Thomas dropped his suitcase on the floor, the thud strangely muted in the thick silence. The sound seemed to be swallowed by the room, as if it were absorbing any attempt to break its eerie tranquility. He walked towards the window, hoping to catch a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the stifling atmosphere that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. But the window wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he pushed or pulled, it remained stubbornly shut. It was as if it had been nailed shut, sealing him within the room's suffocating embrace. The realization sent a wave of claustrophobia washing over him. He turned back to survey the room, his unease growing with every passing second. The shadows seemed to shift and dance in the corners of his vision, playing tricks on his mind. The room was sparsely furnished, a lumpy double bed with stained sheets, the mattress sagging in the middle as if it had borne the weight of countless restless nights. A rickety writing desk with a chipped mirror, the glass so clouded with age that it barely reflected his image, and a solitary armchair that looked as though it hadn't been sat in for decades. Dust coated its surface, and the fabric was worn thin in places. The silence was broken only by the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock in the corner, its presence both comforting and unnerving, each tick a hammer blow against his raw nerves. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness, amplifying his sense of isolation. He glanced at the clock face, its hands frozen at 4:04. The time seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of the room's eerie stillness. A shiver ran down his spine. The room's atmosphere was getting to him, gnawing at his nerves. He was certain he had seen it move, but the hands remained stubbornly fixed. It was as if time itself had stopped in this room. A low hum vibrated beneath his feet, barely perceptible at first, but growing steadily in intensity. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the building, a deep, resonant thrum that he could feel in his chest. Thomas's confusion turned to fear. What was causing the hum? Was it the building settling or something more sinister? He looked around frantically, trying to locate the source of the sound. But the room offered no clues, only shadows and silence. He placed his hand against the wall, feeling the vibrations travel through his fingertips. The sensation was unsettling, as if the room itself was alive. He backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in tighter with each passing moment. Summoning his courage, Thomas decided he couldn't stay in this room any longer. He had to get out, find another place to stay, somewhere that didn't feel like a tomb. He grabbed his suitcase, the weight of it grounding him, giving him a sense of purpose. With determined steps, he walked towards the door, ready to leave the oppressive atmosphere of room 404 behind. His hand reached for the doorknob, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the room. The door creaked open, the sound echoing in the silence like a final farewell. Thomas stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, the air feeling fresher, lighter, as if he had just escaped from a suffocating grip. Relief washed over him, and he took a deep breath, savoring the freedom from the room's oppressive atmosphere. He walked down the hallway, each step taking him further away from the last room on the left, room 404, and its haunting presence. As he glanced back one last time, the number 404 seemed to glint ominously in the dim light, a reminder of the room that had almost ensnared him. But he turned away, disappearing around the corner, leaving the room and its secrets behind. The hallway was empty once more, the door to room 404 left slightly ajar as if waiting for its next visitor. The hum intensified, resonating through the room, through him. It was as if the very walls were alive, vibrating with an energy that seemed to seep into his bones. The sound was not just heard, it was felt, a deep, penetrating vibration that made his teeth chatter and his heart race. It was a low, guttural sound, like the growl of some unseen beast. The noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room with an oppressive presence. It was a sound that spoke of ancient, primal fears, of things lurking in the dark, waiting to pounce. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Goosebumps erupted across his skin, a physical manifestation of the terror that gripped him. It was as if his body was reacting to a threat that his mind could not yet comprehend. He felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. The droplets of sweat trickled down his forehead, stinging his eyes and blurring his vision. His shirt clung to his back, damp and uncomfortable, as the fear continued to build within him. He glanced at the door, a sudden urge to flee gripping him. The door seemed so far away, a distant hope of escape that felt increasingly out of reach. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out, but his body refused to obey, but his legs felt leaden, rooted to the spot. It was as if an invisible force was holding him in place, preventing him from moving. He tried to lift his foot to take a step, but it was no use. He was trapped, paralyzed by fear. The hum seemed to be weaving a spell around him, holding him captive. It was a sound that ensnared his senses, wrapping around him like a cocoon. He felt as if he was sinking into it, being swallowed by the noise. He tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over him, but it was no use. The fear was like a living thing, clinging to him, refusing to let go. He could feel it in his chest, a heavy weight that made it hard to breathe.
What is happening here? His voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the room seemed to close in around him.
His gaze fell on a dark stain spreading across the faded floral wallpaper, like a drop of ink on blotting paper. The stain was ominous, a creeping darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the hum, growing larger, darker with every passing second. The stain seemed to be alive, expanding and contracting in time with the sound as if it was breathing. He couldn't tear his eyes away, mesmerized by its grotesque expansion. The stain was hypnotic, drawing him in, making it impossible to look away. It was a black hole, consuming everything in its path. The air grew colder, the temperature plummeting, as if a window had been flung open to the icy void of space. The chill was sudden and intense, biting into his skin and making him shiver uncontrollably. He could see his breath now, forming wispy clouds in the frigid air. Each exhale was a visible reminder of the cold that had invaded the room, a stark contrast to the warmth that had been there moments before. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, taking on monstrous forms in his increasingly agitated mind. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. He was trapped. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. The room had become a prison, the walls closing in, the shadows and sounds conspiring to keep him there. There was no escape, no way out. He was at the mercy of whatever malevolent force had taken hold of the room, and of him. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to overwhelm him. He rushed to the door, his hand shaking as he fumbled with the handle. It wouldn't turn. He rattled it harder, throwing his weight against the unyielding wood, but the door remained firmly shut, as if sealed by some unseen force. He hammered on the door with his fists, his voice a desperate cry for help that was swallowed by the thick silence.
Hello, is anyone there? Help me!
His words echoed back at him, mocking his plight. He stumbled back from the door, his gaze darting around the room, searching for another way out. The window, the hum, the spreading stain, it all pointed to a horrifying truth. This was no ordinary room, it was a prison, a cage designed to hold him captive. He was trapped in a nightmare, a waking nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. He sank to his knees, his back against the cold, unyielding wood of the door, his chest constricting with terror. He was alone, utterly and completely alone.
What is happening? This can't be real.
Thomas's mind was racing. The room seemed to warp and twist around him, the walls closing in.
You shouldn't have come here. Leave while you still can.
Stop it, just stop. This isn't real. It's just in my head.
The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. Thomas's breath became shallow as he noticed movement from the bed.
Who's there? Show yourself.
You will never leave.
A faceless figure emerged from the bed, its form distorted and unnatural, sending chills down Thomas's spine.
No, stay back. What do you want from me?
You are mine now.
The figure's words echoed in the room, a promise of unending terror.
I need to get out of here. Now!
Thomas frantically tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped.
What is happening? The walls, they're closing in.
The room seemed to respond to his fear, the walls inching closer with each passing second.
You cannot leave. You belong to me now.
There must be a way out. Think, Thomas, think.
Desperation fueled his search for an escape, but every attempt was thwarted by the room's malevolent presence.
No, this can't be real. Someone please help me.
Reality warped around him, the room's grip tightening as Thomas's cries echoed into the void.
You are lost forever.